Arik was born in a small, quiet village nestled between green hills and wide, flowing rivers. From a young age, he was different from the other children, not in any obvious way at first, but in the way life seemed to test him more than it tested others. When he was just a boy, a terrible accident during a village festival left him with deep scars across his arms and chest. The accident was nothing heroic, just a moment of misfortune. But the marks it left were permanent, and they made him stand out in a place where appearances and strength were everything. From the beginning, the villagers noticed the scars, and some could not hide their surprise. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Children in the streets would point and giggle. Other young boys, the ones who would later train as warriors alongside him, would mimic the accident in cruel games, laughing as if it were a joke meant only to embarrass him. Even adults sometimes exchanged uneasy looks, unsure whether to treat him like a normal child or to pity him silently. Arik felt all of it, the stares, the laughter, and the quiet disappointment in people's eyes. But he never let them see how it hurt. Instead, he held his head high, keeping his gaze steady even when his heart ached. Life in the village was not easy for anyone, but it was particularly hard for Arik. The village valued warriors and protectors, and the strongest, healthiest, and most flawless bodies earned the most respect. Every day, the young boys would practice sword swings, archery, and combat drills in the open fields. Arik would watch, longing to join, but each time he stepped forward, he felt the weight of the whispers. "He's too weak," someone would mutter. "Look at his scars. How can he ever fight?" The words burned, but they also sparked something else inside him, a quiet determination that would grow stronger with every passing day. Despite the teasing and the doubts of others, Arik refused to let fear or shame stop him. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, he would sneak out to the edge of the village where the forest began and train in secret. He swung sticks like swords, dodged imaginary attacks, and practiced moving with speed and balance. His movements were awkward at first, but over time they became sharper, more precise. Each scar on his body reminded him of his past weakness, and each day of training reminded him that he had the power to change himself. He was learning not just to fight, but to endure, to survive, and to grow stronger. Arik's perseverance did not go completely unnoticed. One morning, as he practiced in the clearing near the forest, an old man approached him. He was a retired warrior named Brenor, a man who had once fought to protect the village and whose skill in combat was legendary. Brenor had retired years ago, preferring a quiet life, but he still observed the young boys who trained in the village. When he saw Arik practicing alone, struggling yet refusing to give up, he was intrigued. "You have spirit, boy," Brenor said, his voice calm but firm. Arik looked up quickly, startled by the presence of the old warrior. Brenor's eyes were sharp and clear, and he seemed to see past the scars, past the awkward movements, straight into Arik's determination. "Most boys would give up when mocked or ignored," he continued. "But not you. You keep going, even when no one believes in you. That is rare." From that day, Brenor became Arik's secret mentor. He taught him the principles of combat, not just the swinging of swords, but strategy, observation, and patience. Under Brenor's guidance, Arik began to understand that strength was not only about muscles or speed, it was about knowing oneself, using intelligence, and turning past weaknesses into advantages. Brenor reminded him often that his scars were not marks of shame, but reminders of survival and lessons learned. "A warrior is not made by perfection," Brenor would say. "A warrior is made by what he overcomes." Life in the village continued as before. The whispers did not stop. The teasing from other children persisted. There were days when Arik wanted to hide, to disappear, to avoid the pain of seeing people laugh at him. But each time he remembered Brenor's words, Each scar on his body became a silent motivation, a mark that told him he had survived, that he had endured, and that he could still grow stronger. Slowly, he began to change, not just in skill, but in presence. There was a quiet confidence in the way he moved, a steadiness in his gaze, and a calmness that the other boys could not understand. Even though Arik was growing stronger, he still faced challenges in the social world of the village. He tried to join in games and contests, but the other boys often excluded him. "You can't keep up," they would say. "Go away before you get hurt again." At first, their words cut deeply. He felt the sting of rejection and the pang of isolation. But gradually, he learned to turn those moments into lessons. Each failed attempt, each exclusion, each sneer or laugh became a test. He learned patience, endurance, and above all, resilience. He realized that true strength was not in winning the approval of others, but in never giving up despite their laughter. By the time Arik reached his teenage years, he had transformed. The village still whispered, and some still mocked him, but his presence carried a quiet authority. People began to notice that although he had scars, he also had unmatched focus, skill, and courage. He moved differently, trained differently, and thought differently from anyone else. While others relied on appearances or brute force, Arik had something more powerful. He had experience, discipline, and a mind trained to see opportunity where others saw only difficulty. And so, the boy who was once laughed at, who was mocked for the marks on his skin, continued to grow in secret, preparing for the day when the world would no longer see him as weak, but as something far greater, a force to be reckoned with, a warrior forged not by ease, but by the fires of adversity. Arik's teenage years were a time of both hardship and discovery. While other boys his age trained in the village square under the watchful eyes of the elders, Arik continued his secret training with Brenor in the forest. Every morning before sunrise, he would meet his mentor in the clearing where the dew still clung to the grass. Brenor pushed him harder than anyone else, teaching him not just how to swing a sword or draw a bow, but how to think like a warrior. Strategy, patience, observation, and timing became Arik's focus, and slowly, he began to see the difference between fighting for show and fighting to survive. Brenor often told Arik that most people never truly learn to fight. They rely on strength, speed, and bravado, but they lack understanding. Strength without thought is like a river without direction, he would say. It crashes, it rages, but it goes nowhere. A true warrior learns to channel every movement, every thought, every scar into purpose. Arik took these words to heart. Each scar on his body became a reminder not of past weakness, but of the lessons learned. He studied his own movements, refined his techniques, and even used his scars to his advantage, hiding them, revealing them, and moving in ways that confused those who underestimated him. Life in the village, however, remained challenging. The other boys never stopped teasing him, especially during training contests. They would laugh when he tripped, mock him when he made mistakes, and whisper behind his back during drills. "He'll never be a true warrior," they said. "Look at him. How can he fight when he is broken?" At first, Arik's heart sank at these words. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small room, wondering if the laughter would ever stop. But slowly, he began to see it differently. Each insult, each sneer, each exclusion became fuel for his determination. Instead of shrinking from the world, he learned to grow stronger in spite of it. Arik also began to discover other strengths. Unlike the boys who relied solely on brute force, he studied the movements of animals in the forest, watched the way the wind shifted, and learned to read the signs of nature. He practiced stealth, agility, and quick thinking. By observing the world around him, he found ways to turn disadvantage into advantage. He learned how to move silently through the trees, how to anticipate an opponent's move, and how to strike with precision when the moment was right. These skills set him apart, though few noticed them yet. Despite his secret growth, Auric longed for recognition. He wanted to show the village that he was more than his scars, more than their laughter. He wanted to prove that courage and skill were not measured by appearances alone, yet he knew that rushing into public contests unprepared could only lead to humiliation. So he waited, honing his abilities, practicing day after day, until even the hardest techniques became second nature. During this time, a small group of villagers began to notice Auric's progress. They were not the mockers, but those who quietly observed him. An older woman who ran the village bakery, a young boy who shared Auric's love for adventure, and a few others who respected perseverance. They began to speak quietly among themselves, remarking on his dedication and skill. Though they did not publicly support him, their quiet acknowledgement gave Auric a sense of validation. He was still laughed at by most, but he no longer felt alone. Auric's confidence grew slowly but steadily. He started to challenge himself with harder exercises, often simulating combat with imaginary opponents or setting up obstacles in the forest. He pushed his body beyond what he thought possible, testing his limits. When he failed, as he often did, he learned not to give up, but to analyze what went wrong and try again. Every failure became a lesson, every bruise a reminder of effort, and every scar a symbol of survival. But challenges were not only physical. The social pressure of the village continued to weigh on him. He wanted friends, respect, and acceptance, but the laughter of his peers was relentless. There were moments of loneliness that almost made him doubt himself. Yet, during these moments, Brenor's words rang in his mind. A warrior is not made by others' praise. A warrior is made by what he can endure and what he can overcome. Auric clung to these words like a lifeline. They reminded him that true courage was not about popularity or approval. It was about facing difficulty without losing heart. As Auric's training advanced, so did his understanding of strategy. He began to see combat not as a simple contest of strength, but as a battle of wits. He practiced setting traps, creating diversions, and using the environment to his advantage. A fallen branch could be a shield, a shadow could hide his movement, and the wind could carry his strike silently. Auric's scars, once a source of shame, became tools in this learning. Opponents often misjudged him, distracted by the marks on his body, while Auric moved with precision and skill they could not anticipate. Rumors began to spread quietly among some villagers about the boy who trained alone in the forest. They spoke, in hushed tones, about his dedication, his unusual techniques, and his unshakable determination. Some still doubted him, still mocked him behind closed doors. But a few began to wonder if perhaps the boy they laughed at was not as weak as they believed. These whispers did not reach Auric, and that was for the best. He did not train for recognition. He trained for mastery, for resilience, and for the day when he could prove without doubt that courage and skill mattered more than appearances. 1. Evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Brenor sat with Auric on a small hill overlooking the village. "You are ready," the old warrior said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years and experience. Auric looked at him, surprised. "Ready? Ready for what?" he asked. Brenor smiled, his eyes calm but piercing. "Ready to step into the world, ready to show the village that what they see on the surface is not all there is. Your scars tell a story, Auric. They tell of survival, courage, and strength. Soon, everyone else will see it too." Auric felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride, because he had grown stronger than he ever imagined. Fear, because the world beyond the forest was still the world of laughter, doubt, and mockery. Yet deep, inside, he knew that the years of secret training, the endless effort, and the quiet determination had prepared him for this moment. He was no longer the boy who hid behind the trees. He was becoming a warrior, and soon the village, and perhaps the world beyond, would have to recognize him for who he truly was. And so Auric continued his training, not for approval, not for praise, but for mastery, resilience, and the courage to face the challenges that were soon to come. Every swing of the sword, every step in the forest, every controlled breath became a step closer to the day when laughter would turn into awe, doubt would turn into respect, and the boy they once mocked would rise into legend. The day of the regional warrior games arrived with a crisp morning breeze and the buzz of excitement in the village square. For years, these games had been the stage for the strongest, the fastest, and the most skilled warriors in the region. Villagers from nearby towns gathered to watch, cheering loudly as each competitor demonstrated their strength, speed, and technique. Auric, now older and stronger, arrived quietly at the edge of the crowd. He had trained in secret for years, but today he would face the world that had always mocked him. The laughter began as soon as he stepped onto the field. Children who once teased him now shouted reminders of his past scars, and some adults whispered that he would never stand a chance against the other warriors. Even the young competitors sneered at him, exchanging knowing looks. "Look at him," one said. "He thinks he can compete. Just look at those scars. How can he fight like that?" For a moment, Auric felt the familiar sting of doubt, but he remembered Brenor's words. A warrior is made by what he overcomes, not by what others think. He straightened his back, clenched his fists, and prepared himself. The first contest was a test of agility. Warriors had to cross a series of obstacles, jump over logs, duck under low branches, and balance on narrow beams. Many competitors rushed forward confidently, relying on raw strength. Auric, however, moved differently. He timed each jump, balanced carefully on the beams, and used the momentum of his body to glide smoothly from one obstacle to the next. His scars, once a target for ridicule, now seemed to give him a presence that made others hesitate, unsure of how he would move. When he finished, he did not merely survive the course. He completed it with a grace and precision that drew the first whispers of astonishment from the crowd. Next came the test of skill with the sword. Warriors faced each other in one-on-one duels. Auric's opponents assumed it would be easy to defeat him. The first young warrior swung his sword aggressively, mocking Auric with every step. But Auric had learned to observe, to anticipate. He waited, patiently, studying his opponent's patterns. When the moment was right, he moved with speed and accuracy, parrying the attack and countering with a precise strike that disarmed his opponent. The crowd gasped, laughter turned into murmurs, and murmurs into cheers. Auric's scars, which had once invited mockery, now seemed like symbols of endurance and hidden strength. Each duel after that grew more challenging, but Auric's strategy never wavered. He faced warriors bigger and faster than himself, yet he used his intelligence, his careful observation, and his unique training to outmaneuver them. His movements were unpredictable because they were not learned in the traditional way. They were crafted from years of trial, error, and adaptation. The laughter from earlier contests had vanished, replaced by astonishment and curiosity. Even the village elders, who had doubted him for so long, leaned forward in surprise, unable to look away from the boy they had once dismissed. But it was not just his skill that impressed the spectators. It was the calm confidence he carried. He did not rush, did not panic, and did not falter under pressure. While other competitors bristled with anger when challenged, Auric remained steady, almost serene. His scars, once a source of shame, now seemed to reflect his journey. Each mark a story of endurance, each movement a lesson learned from hardship. People began to realize that what they had laughed at for years was actually the foundation of his strength. As the games progressed, the final contest approached, a challenge of endurance and leadership. Warriors were required not only to fight, but to lead small groups through a simulated battle scenario, testing both skill and strategic thinking. Orcs' group was composed of younger, less experienced fighters, many of whom doubted themselves and expected failure. Yet Orcs' quiet. Authority began to guide them. He instructed them calmly, positioning each member where they could be most effective, and encouraged them when they hesitated. His leadership transformed uncertainty into confidence. By the end of the contest, Orcs' team not only succeeded, they excelled, completing the task with efficiency and skill that no one had predicted. The moment of public recognition arrived slowly. The same people who had once laughed were now whispering in awe. Children stared with wide eyes, elders nodded with respect, and even his former rivals looked at him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The boy they had mocked, the one they had dismissed because of his scars, had not only competed, but dominated in ways they could not ignore. Arik did not gloat or boast. He simply stood tall, letting his actions speak louder than words. But just as Arik was beginning to feel a sense of accomplishment, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A dangerous group of marauders was approaching the village. They had attacked neighboring villages, leaving destruction in their wake. The games would have to be paused, and the focus shifted from competition to survival. The crowd's excitement quickly turned to concern, and panic threatened to spread. Many villagers looked around helplessly, wondering who could protect them from this threat. Arik felt a familiar resolve rise within him. This was the true test, the moment when skill, courage, and leadership would matter more than applause or recognition. He stepped forward, volunteering to help organize the defense of the village. The people who had once doubted him now looked to him for guidance. His scars, which had been a source of ridicule, were now marks of experience and resilience, symbols of the journey that had prepared him for this very challenge. As he began planning with the village elders, Arik realized that the years of secret training, the countless hours in the forest, and the moments of solitude and struggle had all led to this moment. He was ready, not just to fight, but to inspire, to lead, and to protect. The crowd that had once laughed at him now watched silently, waiting to see what the boy with the scars would do next. In that moment, Arik understood something vital. True, legend was not born in contests or games, but in action when it mattered most. The laughter of the past had shaped him, the challenges had honed him, and now the world would see the warrior he had become. His journey from mockery to mastery was far from over, but the first steps of that transformation had already begun. Rick felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as the news of the marauders' approach spread through the village. The games and applause were forgotten. Fear rippled through the villagers, some unsure of what to do, others paralyzed by panic. Arik, however, felt a sense of clarity. This was the moment he had been training for. Not for recognition or glory, but to protect the people he cared about, and to show that strength came not just from the body, but from courage, strategy, and the will to act. He moved quickly, gathering the village elders, the able-bodied men, and even those who had once doubted him. "We cannot face them blindly," Arik said, his voice calm but firm. "We must plan. We must use what we know and what we have." His words carried authority, not because he demanded it, but because he had proven himself through years of patience and skill. People who had mocked him for his scars now listened, their doubt replaced with trust and hope. Arik began by assessing the village's strengths and weaknesses. He knew the terrain well, the hills, the river, the narrow paths through the forest, and he used this knowledge to create defensive positions. He placed lookouts on higher ground, set traps along likely entry points, and instructed villagers to prepare weapons, barricades, and escape routes. He taught them to work together, emphasizing teamwork over individual heroics. The village, once disorganized and fearful, began to move with purpose under Orcs' guidance. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the distant sound of the marauders' march reached the village. Dust rose in the fields, and the thunder of hooves echoed through the hills. The tension was palpable. Villagers gripped their weapons, faces pale with fear, while Arik moved among them, adjusting positions, calming nerves, and offering encouragement. "Stay calm," he said repeatedly. "Focus on what we can control. Together we are strong." His scars, visible on his arms as he moved, reminded everyone that the boy who had been laughed at had survived hardships and emerged stronger, ready to defend them all. The battle began in earnest when the marauders reached the edge of the village. They were a large, well-organized group, confident from their previous raids. But Arik's careful planning began to take effect immediately. Traps slowed their advance, hidden obstacles forced them to separate, and ambush points allowed the villagers to strike with precision. Arik led the first group himself, moving through the chaos with calm determination. Every movement was calculated, every strike intentional. He used his knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the attackers, turning what could have been panic into strategic advantage. The villagers, inspired by Arik's bravery, fought with newfound courage. Even those who had never held a weapon before learned quickly under his guidance. Arik moved among them, correcting mistakes, encouraging hesitant fighters, and setting examples with his own skill and resilience. His scars, once a source of shame, now seemed like marks of strength, symbols of a life that had endured difficulty and emerged victorious. People who had once laughed at him now followed his every command without question. The battle was not easy. The marauders were relentless, striking from different directions, testing the villagers' defenses. At one point, a group broke through a barricade, and Arik charged to intercept them. He fought with agility and precision, using techniques few expected, striking in ways that minimized risk while maximizing impact. His scars caught the glint of the fading sunlight as he moved, a reminder of past pain transformed into present power. Every swing, every maneuver was a lesson learned from years of secret training and relentless effort. Hours passed, and the village began to gain the upper hand. The marauders, frustrated by the unexpected skill and coordination of the villagers, began to falter. Arik continued to lead, never allowing himself to be distracted by fear or fatigue. He inspired confidence not just through words, but through action. Where others might have panicked or fled, Arik stood firm, demonstrating that courage was contagious. The villagers, emboldened by his presence, fought with determination they did not know they had. At one critical moment, Arik noticed a group of marauders attempting to flank the village from the riverbank. Without hesitation, he led a small team to intercept them. Using the narrow path and surrounding forest, they set up a clever ambush. When the marauders entered the trap, they found themselves surrounded, forced to retreat in confusion. The villagers cheered quietly, careful not to reveal their positions to other attackers, but the victory reinforced their growing trust in Arik's leadership. By sunset, the marauders, exhausted and disoriented, began to retreat. The village had survived, and the damage was minimal thanks to careful planning and Arik's guidance. As the dust settled, villagers emerged from hiding, some hugging loved ones, others tending to minor injuries. Their fear had turned into relief and admiration. They looked at Arik differently now, not as the boy with scars, but as the warrior who had saved them. The transformation in their perception was profound. Those who had once mocked him now approached with respect, acknowledging the skill, courage, and wisdom that had led them through the day. After the battle, Arik walked through the village quietly, observing the aftermath. Families were safe, the homes intact, and the villagers had gained confidence from having faced danger together. He spoke little, knowing that his actions had already conveyed the message. Scars do not define weakness. Courage, skill and resilience do. Brenor, who had quietly followed him to witness the battle, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have done more than I could have imagined," the old warrior said. "You have turned their doubt into respect, their fear into courage. This is the mark of a true leader." That evening, as the village gathered to celebrate their survival, Arik stood apart for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. The boy who had once been laughed at, shunned, and underestimated had led his people through a test that proved his worth beyond any contest or game. His scars, once symbols of weakness, had become symbols of survival, resilience, and strength. He understood now that true courage was not about being fearless, but about facing fear and acting in spite of it. The villagers who had doubted him now shared stories of his bravery. Children who had once pointed and laughed now listened with wide eyes, inspired by the example of someone who had endured hardship and emerged stronger. Even his former rivals approached him with respect, acknowledging the skill, intelligence, and courage that had turned a boy with scars into a leader. They could follow. Arik knew that this was only the beginning. There would be other challenges, other battles, and other moments that would test his courage and skill. But now he also knew that the laughter of the past had been necessary. It had shaped him, hardened him, and prepared him for the moment when he would rise. The journey from mockery to legend was far from over, but the first true steps had been taken, and the boy with the scars had proven that strength, resilience, and courage could change the world. The days after the battle were filled with a quiet sense of pride and relief in the village. Life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but everything had changed. The villagers no longer looked at Arik with mockery or doubt. Instead, they saw the courage, skill, and wisdom that had guided them through a moment of great danger. Children who once laughed at his scars now ran to watch him train, hoping to learn from the boy who had become a hero. Elders who had doubted him spoke of his bravery to neighboring villages. Arik had walked into legend, and yet he remained humble, understanding that true greatness came from actions, not recognition. Arik continued his training, but now he included others. Young villagers who had been timid or unskilled before now sought his guidance. He taught them everything Brenor had taught him: precision, strategy, observation, and the courage to face adversity. He emphasized that scars, whether visible or hidden, were marks of endurance, not weakness. "Do not hide your past," he would tell them. "Your struggles make you stronger. Your courage is measured by how you rise after hardship." The village began to change because of Arik's influence. People who had been divided by fear or doubt now worked together. The games and contests, once only a place for showcasing strength, became opportunities to learn and grow. Arik encouraged everyone to find their own skills, to train not just for competition but for life, for survival, and for the protection of one another. His scars, once a symbol of ridicule, became a symbol of inspiration, proof that the boy who had been laughed at had become a leader, teacher, and protector. Word of Arik's courage spread to other villages. Travelers told stories of the boy with scars who had led his people to victory against the marauders. Merchants shared tales of his intelligence, patience, and skill. Even warriors from other regions came to watch him train, hoping to learn from someone who had faced adversity and emerged not only victorious but transformed. Arik did not seek fame, but he accepted the respect and admiration quietly, knowing that what mattered was the example he set and the lives he helped shape. Over time, Arik took on challenges beyond his village. He helped neighboring towns prepare for threats, teaching them strategy and the value of resilience. Each journey reminded him of his past, the laughter, the isolation, the years of secret training. Every step reinforced the lesson that hardship, when faced with courage and determination, could lead to growth and strength. The scars he bore were never hidden, but proudly displayed, reminders to himself and others that survival and perseverance were far more important than appearances. As he grew older, Auric became a figure of legend, not just for his deeds, but for his character. He treated every person with respect, no matter their age or skill. He encouraged children to dream and to work hard, showing them that effort and courage were more powerful than natural talent alone. He reminded his fellow villagers that leadership was not about domination, but about guidance, protection, and the ability to inspire others to find strength within themselves. The village celebrated Auric's victories in subtle but meaningful ways. The elders invited him to ceremonies, children drew his image in the dirt while playing, and families told stories of his bravery to younger generations. The boy who had once been laughed at was now a symbol of hope, endurance, and courage. His presence reminded everyone that adversity could be transformed into strength, that ridicule could be turned into motivation, and that true heroes were forged in the fires of challenge and perseverance. Auric's scars, which had been a source of shame in his youth, had become a symbol of resilience. They told a story of survival, of facing pain and doubt, and of emerging stronger. They reminded the villagers and travelers alike that true strength came from facing life's challenges head-on, and that courage and wisdom often mattered more than physical perfection. Even his former rivals now looked to him with admiration, seeking guidance and learning from the example he set. In quiet moments, Auric reflected on his journey. He thought of the mornings in the forest with Brenor, the whispered laughter of his peers, the endless training, and the trials he had faced alone. Every step had led to this point, every struggle had prepared him for leadership, and every scar had marked a lesson learned. He understood that legend was not built overnight, nor was it built by force alone. It was built by resilience, by courage in the face of fear, and by the willingness to act when others faltered. As the sun set over the village, casting golden light over the hills and rivers, Auric stood on a small rise overlooking the land he had helped protect. Children played below, warriors trained, and villagers moved with confidence and unity. The boy who had once been laughed at had walked into legend, but he carried humility, gratitude, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. He had transformed the laughter of mockery into the respect of generations, showing that true strength was forged not by avoiding pain, but by facing it and rising stronger. In the years that followed, Auric's story became a foundation for the village's identity. Parents told their children of the warrior with scars who had saved them, teaching lessons of resilience, courage, and determination. Young warriors trained with inspiration, knowing that skill, patience, and perseverance were as important as strength. And through it all, Auric remained present, not as a distant hero, but as a living example of what could be achieved through hard work, courage, and heart. By the time Auric grew older, the village had changed entirely. What was once a place of division, mockery, and doubt had become a community bound by shared respect, courage, and hope. The laughter that had once hurt him was replaced by admiration and trust. The scars he bore were no longer marks of shame, but emblems of triumph and resilience. Children would point to him with pride, saying, "That is Auric. He is strong because he never gave up." Travelers would repeat the story, spreading the legend further, reminding everyone that even those who are underestimated or mocked can rise to greatness. Auric's life became a lesson for all who knew him, that the measure of a warrior is not in the absence of scars, but in the courage to keep moving forward, the strength to protect others, and the wisdom to lead with heart. His journey from ridicule to reverence showed that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into power, and that true legend is built not on perfection, but on endurance, courage, and the ability to inspire those around you. And so, the boy, who had once been laughed at, walked into legend. His scars gleamed in the sunlight, not as reminders of shame, but as badges of honor. His name was spoken with respect, his deeds remembered for generations, and his life became a shining example of how perseverance, skill, and heart can turn even the most difficult beginnings into a story worth telling, a story of courage, transformation, and legend.